back in the woods.
Morning guys, Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School out here on the Pathfinder School property, and I wanted to go over a video today in our trapping series on snares, and we're going to talk about what makes a good snare versus what doesn't make a good snare, simple components of a snare. We're going to talk about set locations for snaring, and we'll talk about a couple simple things as far as how to set up a snare and simple things you can use to set your snares. Now, I would recommend that you buy snares. It's my experience, especially lately, you know, I just graduated from the Trappers College for the Fur Takers of America, and I can tell you I saw what larger animals will do to a cable snare, like large raccoons and things like that, and they flat destroy them. So one of the things that you need to remember with snaring is if you're planning on snaring in a short-term, medium-term, or longer-term survival situation, think about the fact that one snare means one animal. Because it can, not always, but it can definitely mean that one time you use that snare, it's completely useless to be used again as a snare. Snares have memory in them, and you have to exercise that memory when you create a snare, unless you buy a snare that already has that memory set into it. But once an animal gets into that snare, twists it up, tangles it up, wraps it around 3 or 4 different trees, it's pretty much useless. You've got to cut it off the animal. And most of the time, you're either going to have to do one of two things. The animal will generally be alive when you get there, so you're going to have to dispatch him with like a .22 revolver right to the head, or you're going to have to catch him with some kind of a noose or snare pole situation that you can make or buy, and then hold him down, cut the cable, and then carry him off, keep him in a distance from you with the snare pole, and release a non-target animal. So think about all of those things when you talk about snaring. Now, how effective is snaring? I'm going to put a short slideshow at the end of this video to show you just exactly how effective snaring can be, and show you animals that I personally and my instructor Tony Daniels caught in snares 2 weeks ago, or week before last, or last week I think it was, at the Fur Takers of America Trappers College on a 12,000 acre wildlife area. The area that we're in now at the Pathfinder School backs up to a 4,000 acre wildlife area. We have plenty of game out here. We have a trapping class coming up in December. I encourage you to join us if you'd like to on survival trapping. We're going to use snares, set snares. We're going to talk about conibears. We're going to talk about footholds and all of those things. But the questions I get a lot about are snares, because they're so light and you can carry a lot of them into any type of situation that you want to get yourself some meat. And snares don't take up a lot of room in your pack, and they're very, very effective. So we'll talk about those right now. Okay, so I've got a couple of Ziploc bags that have 2 different types of snares in them right here. And there are half a dozen snares in each one of these bags. So this is 1 dozen snares. And these would be what I would consider good enough to put in my bag in a survival, bug out, short-term, medium-term situation. They're fairly heavy duty. This one is a 3/64, this one is larger. This one is what's called 7x7, which means it has 7 inner strands with 7 outer strands wrapped around it. This cable here would actually hold a small, medium-sized deer very, very easily if you were to snare a deer in a survival situation. This will definitely hold anything up to a medium, large raccoon. Anything bigger than that, you're going to want something like this. Now, let's talk about how snares are made and how they operate real quick. Now, you can make snares out of a lot of things, and you can make them out of piano wire, you can make them out of guitar strings, you can make them out of picture wire, all kinds of things you can make snares out of. What you're not going to have with those type snares is you're not going to have this memory where this thing just hangs perfectly in a snare cable, okay? And this one has a locker on it, and it's a slide lock, so that when something touches it, it slides down. And the way that's set up is, it's just a piece of wire ran through that locking device, so that when something enters the snare and hits it, it immediately closes down on them, and it does not go backwards. It can't loosen up on the animal. It only gets tighter. Now, some states require you to put locking mechanisms in this wire that will prevent the snare from closing past a certain distance, and that's considered more humane, so it doesn't just keep getting worse and worse and tighter on the animal, because you can see that thing will close down as small as you want it to. But what you want is you want to find out where the best spot is on that snare as far as the loop goes. And that's how you want to wind your snare. So when you wind your snare back up, you want to keep that loop in that cable. Okay? Now you also have a swivel point that's blocked off with a washer here. And these swivel points are pretty important. And the reason they're so important, you'll see in some of the pictures that I put at the end of this video, animals will tend to get hung in these snares, twist, flip around, go over and under things, and kind of roll around in circles. And if you don't have this, it's going to bind your wire up even worse than it needs to be. And then the chances of saving your snare are even more slim. So having this on here gives the animal comfort, but it also helps to save your snare a little bit as well. And this one was set up to either be staked into the ground or wired off to a solid object, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. The other component that it has besides the locking device, which is connected to the end of the line right here, and then it goes over the top right here to make your snare, is what's called a whammy. Okay, it's very important that you have this whammy on here, and you'll see when we talk about simple sets of snares how important this whammy is. And this whammy basically is just a plastic or rubberized collar that's very small that allows you to put something through it like a trap stand that you can make from just a stick, a piece of wire, a coat hanger, which is what I'm going to show you how to use as a coat hanger. They work very well for this, and they don't take up much room, and they're pretty close to free to get. So that's what we're going to use for our snare stand. Now, those are the components that I think you need on a snare to make it a good, capable snare that's going to do a lot for you. When you start making snares that are less mechanical than this or less complicated than this, like just from picture wire or piano wire, guitar wires, things of that nature, small pieces of wire in general, you have basically put yourself in a position where you're almost back to primitive trapping. You can make almost the same type of snare with a heavy piece of bank line, and probably not going to chew through the wire like they would through the bank line, but the chance of them breaking it or not operating correctly and things of that nature, those percentages decrease the more primitive your snaring methods become. So having a good modern snare like this with lockers on it is very important. I'm going to show you one of these other heavier ones right now. And like I said, this thing will hold up to and including something the size of a small deer very easily if it had to. That's not saying that you're targeting deer. That's saying that in a situation where it was a longer term sustainability type situation and you snared a deer, this type of cable would hold that animal. And the way these are set up is exactly the same way, just a little different mechanisms on them is all. You've got to make sure you get this unwrapped exactly the right way. You can see the memory loop in that snare and the slide. And you see how fast that fell, okay? That's a fast snare right there. These are the ones that we sell on our website. And that's why we sell them, because they're made in the USA, they're bulletproof, and they're immediate, they're fast. When you hang this in a snare location, what you want to happen is, you don't want that animal to have to pull on this snare for it to tighten up. All you want is for him to have to touch it, and it tightens up on him. As soon as he touches that line, it tightens up around his body, his neck, or however you've caught him. And most animals, you're going to find you're going to get caught around the body. They're not going to get caught around the neck very often. Again, it has a whammy on it right here. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then it just has a loop where it's been wired over and crimped off. And that loop allows you a little bit more flexibility than just staking. And I like the longer snare. This is like a 3-foot snare, a 3.5-foot snare. And the reason I like these longer snares is because of the way you can connect them and disconnect them so easily without having to stake them. And I'll show you that when we start setting these up in a minute. So again, to wind this thing up, you just get this thing, feed this through to its best loop size, which is about right there. That's about where it likes to sit. And then again, as soon as something hits it, boom, they're snared. So I'll open that thing up to its spot, and then just wrap it around a few times. Wrap the line through it 3 or 4 times and put it in the bag. It's very important that you take care of your snares. Now, let's talk about snares as far as getting them ready to be used. All right? You do not have to wax a snare. You do not have to dip a snare. You do not have to even necessarily dye a snare. All of those things are unnecessary, which makes them, again, less of a hassle to use than a normal trap that you want to wax and dye and things like that, because it's not necessary. You can take a snare, and it'll work with conibears as well, because you really don't want to wax them either. but you can take a snare and hang it on a fence and spray paint it. If you want to make this thing a more natural color, you can spray paint it with a brown or a green paint, whatever the case may be. You're not going to hurt the snare a bit doing that. Or you can just leave it out and let it oxidize a little bit and get a natural rusty color to it, in which case I'd coat it with some fixing wax after the fact to keep it fast. But a lot of guys I know that I met at the Trappers College just like to paint them. They don't do anything else but paint them. They don't boil them. They don't do anything else. They don't clean them. They take them out of the package. They spray them down and hang them on the fence for a few days after they've been painted, and they're ready to rock. This set of snares that I showed you to begin with has been dipped in speed dip, and that's it. And they're ready to rock. Okay, so with all that said, now we're going to talk about snare stands. And I've got two hangers here, and I just bent them in half to put them in my pack here. But these are just two regular wire coat hangers. And these are what we're going to use to make our snare stands with. I just wanted to show you that they were coat hangers before I cut them up with a pair of wire cutters, so you can see exactly what they were before we got started here. Okay, so I'll fold them back up and put them back in my pack, and then we'll talk about them in just a minute, because I want to talk about location with you for a second first. Now, before we go into location, we need to talk about tools. What are you going to need for tools to set a snare? Well, you really don't need a lot. I mean, you need a pair of wire cutters, and you've probably got those on your multi-tool. You're going to need something like that just to cut your coat hangers or whatever you're using for your stand, or you can use wood for your stand, but wire connected to wood works really well too. The other thing that I like to carry with me when I'm snaring is these double-ended clips, and I'll show you why these are so handy in a few minutes. But when you've got that loop on the end of your cable snare and it's about 3.5 to 4 feet long, these things are ideal for just bouncing, boom, boom, boom. You're on the move, you're setting snares, maybe leaving them a couple days, moving to the next spot. We'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. And then some type of a pair of pliers. Like I said, I generally will carry a set of Trappers pliers with me, like Lyman's pliers, on top of a multi-tool. And then I like to carry a set of like pruning shears with me as well, that are just, you know, regular pruning shears that you'd use to prune in your garden with, but they work really good for cutting small branches and things real quick to make snare stands. And we'll talk about that as we go as well. So let's go look at a game trail, talk about how to pick game trails, and then we'll talk about how to set those trails. Okay, here's a game trail coming out of the woods right here to an open field. Now, that's probably some type of small game. It's not beat up too bad, but it's not used very much either unless it's just rabbits using it. So I would probably go down that trail a little bit, pick it in there a little bit, and see if I could find some rabbit scat or something like that, because they poop everywhere. They don't have toilets like some animals do, like river otter. They just go wherever. I might check that out, but I'd be looking for a better spot than that, to be honest with you. So let's move on down the line, down the wood line here a little bit, see if we can find a better example. Okay, here's a good example of a trail that I would probably want to set. This thing is well worn down. You can almost see bare dirt in certain areas where the animal's been traveling this. It's pretty thin as far as narrowness goes. There is plenty of area for a deer to get through here, and a deer could be using this trail. But other game will travel this trail as well, and we can set our snare to eliminate catching a deer and only catch our target animals, and we'll show you how to do that right now. Okay, now I moved quite a bit of stuff right here that I wouldn't normally have moved, but I wanted you guys to be able to see in here real good with the camera. So what we're going to do is, if we were going to set a cable snare on this trail, a good place to do that's between these two trees, because it's a good choke point. And we can build up a few things. Animals are going to take the path of least resistance. So we need to make this the path of least resistance. And we can funnel them in a little bit. I'm going to save one of these sticks to use for a trip stick for a deer in a minute. But we can take some things that are laying here beside the trail, and we can kind of funnel in this area a little bit and open the trail up and just pile some of the junk up on both sides, and that will kind of run them right into our snare. And we can take this junk and pile it up on this side as well, the same way, and just leave this snare path open. And then where we're going to put our snare, we'll clean out a little bit. Okay, now here's where the importance of that whammy comes in that snare stand. So we're going to take our coat hanger that we've got right here and our pliers, and we're going to make a snare stand. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to cut one side of this coat hanger off, just like this, where I've got it bent in half. And this part right here is going to be my snare stand. Now what I'm going to do with this is, after I straighten it out pretty much, I'm going to bend this over right here on the front in an L, just like that. And that's really all I need to do. Now I can position this wire the rest of the way in the ground, and I've got at least 3 more snare stands in these 2 coat hangers. So I'll put them back in my pack. Now I'm going to use this lighter cable snare that hasn't been dyed or anything so that you guys can see a little bit better what I'm doing. So I'm going to grab one of those out of there. And undo it very carefully, just like this. And remember, everything's got to be unwound just right. You can see how fast that thing is. I mean, all you have to do is just bump it and it goes. Just drops right down. That's what you want in a good snare. That's why I chose this company's snares to carry on my website. Now, you've got that whammy, and that whammy, that piece of rubber tubing, is what you're going to use to connect that snare right here. And then you can pull that through to the exact loop size that you want. So you open up your loop, and if I'm looking to snare coons, I'm looking for a loop about the size of that. Alright, something a little bigger around than my fist, all the way around to give myself a little play. Figuring that coon's head's about the size of my fist, and as soon as his shoulders hit the side of this, it's going to shut. And that's going to give me probably a body catch. You're going to get a lot less neck catches, like I said, than you do body catches anyway. Now I'm going to pull my whammy up here forward of that. Again, check my snare loop size again. That's about right. And I'm going to put this right in my whammy, just like that. And that is going to be my snare stand. Okay? So I'll back up into my trail where I'm going to put this. And I'll put this exactly where I want it in the trail. You see how easy that fell. That snare dropped just from being bumped. That's exactly what you want. Now, you can manipulate this snare stand at this point to exactly the way you want it. And you want that thing about see how easy that falls? We're going to stand this up just a little bit like this. It's easy to manipulate these coat hangers, and that's what I really like about them, is that they're so easy to manipulate. If I put this right in the center of the trail and then block it off everywhere except where that snare loop's at, I've got some issues here with tree roots I'm dealing with here. And that's just part of the deal. You just got to find a spot where the tree roots aren't at. There we go. Now, we can bring this up where we want it. Open it up. Put our whammy on there. Bend it just a little bit like that. I like that snare loop right there at the top, just like that. Now, what I want to do is, I've got to connect the other end of this snare to something. Okay? That's where those clips come in. I've got a couple trees right here that are plenty capable of holding a coon or anything like that. So if I just get in my backpack and grab one of those speed clips, I can put it on one end just like that, wrap it around this tree, clip it again, and I'm ready to go. Now I'll set my snare to make sure it's exactly the way I want it. Get everything back out of the way off the trail, just like that. And I like my snare loop, and I've found it to be most effective if that thing's about 12 o'clock or maybe just a little bit beyond 12 o'clock in straight up and down mode, so that when that animal comes through and touches it, it drops right on him. That's what I want. Now what I'll do, once I've got that set up, and I've got that where I want it, and I've got to give myself a little room off the ground, because remember, the animal's going to be standing. So I want his head to go through here. Now I'm going to fence this thing off, and the fencing is important, because you want that animal to go where you want him to. You've got to fence this thing off. And fencing doesn't have to be stuff necessarily that just, it only has to be stuff he doesn't want to walk on. You're not necessarily building a wall, because you don't have to do that. The animal's going to take the path of least resistance. If I just put a pile of sticks right here, he's not going to walk around that pile of sticks as long as they go all the way to this tree. He's going to walk in the path of least resistance, which is right here. And then I can do the same thing over here with the sticks. Drop a couple sticks down right here, maybe stick it in the dirt a little bit, and he's not going to try to go through that. I don't want anything poking out anywhere toward the animal. So just something like that is good enough. And he's going to walk right around that stuff, and he's going to walk right through my snare. Now, what I don't want to do is I don't want to catch a deer in here. That's where the trip stick comes in. So now I'm going to take this stick here and I'm going to put it about right here, right above my snare, and just bury it in the ground. And I'll probably find some kind of a fork that I can lean it on right here. If I can find one long enough, that'll make it real simple. If not, I could wire it. Looks like there's a piece of vine I can use right here to latch that into. And I can almost set it right on top of my snare. It's not going to hurt anything if I do that. Alright? Now, that animal is not going to walk here because it's not the path of least resistance. He's not going to walk here. It's not the path of least resistance. He's not going to go over the stick. Again, it's not the path of least resistance, but a deer will step over this. So I'm not going to catch a deer. My target animal is a coon, a possum, a skunk, something small, easy to process, quick to eat. This is exactly what I want. This is a good snare setup, just like this. Okay guys, I'm Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. This has been a real quick primer into snaring. There's a lot more that we need to discuss. Different setups, different trails, different ways to do things, water sets, more land sets, things up in trees. We'll talk about all of that. This has just been a quick primer, show you how to make a quick trail set with a coat hanger snare stand, and how to utilize that snare and set it up with the loop, what good components you need on a snare, how to use the whammy, and things of that nature. Like I said, we do carry this type snare on our website for a reason, because I think it's the best. These type snares caught a lot of animals at the Fur Takers of America Trappers College. Stay tuned on the end of this video and I'll put a slideshow of the animals that myself and my instructor Tony Daniel caught last week. I appreciate you joining me for this video. I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything that you do for me, for my family, and for my school. And I'll be back with another educational video in this trapping series as soon as I can.
Less than a mile or so to the end of the dirt road, there's a place us country folk go to have a good time, yeah. Keg of beer and a bonfire, locking hubs on a mud tire, jumping rabbits through the barbed wire by the moonshine still. Down by the river bend, living life like it should have been, praying these days won't ever end.